All right, boys and girls, on this video, we're going to be looking at classifying triangles. And so, really, the last video that I did, we were talking about classifying polygons. And so, classifying polygons, there were several different shapes there that we were kind of looking at. It went we're talking anywhere from triangle to all the way up to an octagon. But I'll just kind of tell you how it is in fifth grade, we really focus on two of those more than the others. And that is, we really spend time on classifying triangles. We also spend time on classifying quadrilaterals. But in this video, we're going to look at classifying triangles. So I'm going to show you the notes that we go over in class, and then we're going to do some practice problems together to kind of see where we usually end up going in class as far as a lesson goes to kind of introduce this to our students. All right, so I'm going to start with the left side of the screen. And first of all, there's really 6 triangles that you need to learn as a fifth grader. They're all 6 on this page. And really, again, I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, when you're classifying shapes, you cannot just see a triangle as a triangle anymore. You have to be more descriptive. You have to to decipher, okay, hey, it's this type of triangle. Plus, it's also this type of triangle. And so that's what classifying is all about. You have to really give it every name that it could be or it could have. So I'm going to start over here on the left side. The first one is an equilateral triangle, so I'm going to underline equilateral. Equilateral, to me, that's one of the easier ones because it's in its name, equilateral triangle. It says an equilateral triangle has 3 congruent sides, and then it also has 3 congruent angles. So I'm going to write that in. Okay, so on this one, kind of going back to learning this shape and kind of thinking about, the easy way out, so to speak. To me, I always teach it as equilateral. So it kind of gets it in its name. Like I said, it's kind of the easiest one out of all of them, in my opinion, to learn. And so a lot of times when I'm teaching it in class, that's kind of what we talk about. We talk about, all right, if it's an equilateral triangle, we're going to think about the word equal. Equal means the same. And so when we see equilateral, back up here to this name, it's pretty easy. So not really too difficult there. It's got 3 congruent angles. Remember, congruent means same size, equal. And it's also have 3 congruent angles. So you kind of see that by the picture here. It's marked up in a couple of different ways. One, it's showing that every side is 3 inches. It's also showing that it's got a mark on the sides. It only has 1 mark, kind of like 1 line in there. But then the angles are also marked with just like 1 curved line. And so you definitely know this is an equilateral triangle. It's also a regular polygon. So pretty easy one to learn. All right, the next one, an isosceles triangle. All right, an isosceles triangle has, and I'm going to type this because it's going to be easier to see, I think. This is kind of a trickier one. So at least 2 is what I'm going to type in there. At least 2. All right, so at least 2 congruent sides. I think the easiest way, at least this is what helped me as a kid. I think what could help you here on this one, since isosceles is kind of hard to spell, but if you can remember this, maybe this is one way you can always kind of go back to it. So isosceles is spelled I-S-O. Those are the first 3 letters. And so I always tell my students, think of TWO O for 2, and then kind of think about that third letter being an O. Maybe that could help you. I don't know. It's kind of strange, but hey, it's a little something that'll kind of make that connection there between isosceles and 2. Okay, so the reason why I said it's kind of tricky at the beginning because it says at least 2. So this one, the one that they have here, you definitely can tell that it at least has 2 because they're marked as 3 inches, and then one of them's 2 inches. And so definitely it falls under the category of an isosceles triangle. But what's interesting though is, and you got to be really careful about this, the definition says at least 2 are congruent. So the triangle that's above it, so this one is actually also an isosceles triangle. Because if you think about it, doesn't it have at least 2? I mean, it has 3, but it at least has 2 congruent sides. And so equilateral triangles could be considered an isosceles triangle. It's kind of interesting. But an isosceles triangle, at least in this picture here, the one that's marked for it in the definition, you wouldn't call that equilateral. And I think this is what gets really, really tricky to kids. Because you're like, well, hey, this one could be this, but not the other one. But this one could be this and not the other one. So it's really, you really have to learn these shapes and these definitions, and you really have to get into practice. So just kind of keep that in mind. So isosceles, ISO, TWO, that's the one dealing with 2, at least 2. All right, then the last one, a scalene triangle, has 0 congruent sides. So I'm going to go with just writing in a 0 there. And then, so this is, to me, this is how I learned it. When I look at the 3, and again, and I probably should have done this at the beginning, but when you look at this left side of the page here, these are all triangles classified by their sides. So even though angles come into play a little bit with equilateral, really you're looking at their side lengths. So down to scalene, this is kind of the one that sometimes will get kids, but this is kind of how I learned it. So for the equilateral, there's the trick because it's equal, and you could think of equilateral being equal. And then for isosceles, there's the trick because of the ISO and the TWO. Well, this one, there's no tricks. And since there's no tricks, then there's no sides that are the same. So again, just something, I don't know. You can come up with your own. I've heard some really interesting ways to memorize this. You got to do what works best for you. And if you got it and it was working, hey, your teachers are probably not going to disagree with it. But it's got to work, though, and it's got to make sense. And so scalene, that's the one, there's no tricks, so there's no sides. No sides are congruent. So that takes care of 3 of them. I actually think for a 5th grade student, those 3 are the tougher ones out of the 6, because the next 3 that we're going to learn on the right side of the page really have to deal with something you should know coming from 4th grade. And that is, these are all classified by their angles. And that would be your angles that you should know from last year. So that is an obtuse angle, that is an acute angle, and that is a right angle. And so we're going to start with the first one. A right triangle has one 90-degree or right angle. And like we had talked about before on classifying shapes, you got to look at everything. You got to look at sides, you got to look at angles. Well, this would be an easy one to spot because it's got that little box or that little square that's sitting down in the corner of this triangle. So we know that that definitely is a right triangle. The next one is an acute triangle. It says it has 3, and then I'm going to write in 3 acute angles. And so here I know, again, my definition of acute, think back to 4th grade. It's a cute little angle. That's usually something that fourth grade teachers will teach. Oh, it's so cute. Look at it. It's so small. Well, it's less than 90 degrees. And so I know here, if I write that in, less than 90, then I can sit there and I can look at all those angles. I could see 75. I could see 75 on there again. I can see 30. Those are definitely all less than 90. So this falls under that category of an acute triangle. And then, of course, there's obtuse. And it says an obtuse triangle has one obtuse angle. And so looking at this one here, again, it's really easy to spot if you remember what obtuse means. You know, obtuse is greater than 90. So that 130-degree angle that's sitting there at the bottom, that's kind of stretching out, almost kind of going towards a straight line there, is a really easy way to spot an obtuse triangle. So you got these six. These six are really going to come into play. What you really have to do, though, and really have to be good at is kind of being able to classify them in a way that, well, hey, it's not just the three on the left and the three on the right. It's anytime I see a triangle, it could be multiple names. And so that's what we're going to try on the next page. All right. I may not do all of these, but I definitely want to practice some of them. And this is actually something I do in my class every year. I always give some type of a project or some type of an assignment where I just throw shapes at my students and they have to sit there and classify, and they have to write down everything that they are. And so this is what I think would be best for us in this video, is just to kind of practice a few of them. So I'm going to start with A, and really and truly, when I look at A, I definitely can see a triangle. That comes to mind, obviously. But there's a lot more than that. And so if I were to, start, I'm just going to type these out. If I were to start typing, probably the first one that comes to mind is an obtuse triangle, because of that Z angle that they have there. They don't have it labeled, but I know that that's greater than 90. So I'm going to start with obtuse triangle. All right. And then the next one and this is kind of maybe my mindset here. So that just took care of my angle classification. My other classification is going to be based off of my sides. Okay, well, this one's kind of tricky. They didn't really mark this one up, but I think we would probably agree here that really, I don't think any of the sides are the same. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark how it would look if none of the sides were the same. There's two ways they could do it. They could just give you like measurements. So maybe they say, okay, well, this side is 7 inches, this side is 5 inches, and then this side's 4 inches. Okay, well, if they do that, you definitely know that none of the sides are the same. And so that's kind of what I see here. At least that's what I'm going to go with on this one. And so if I see 7 inches, 5 inches, 4 inches, then I know that no sides are the same. So if no sides are the same, this is most definitely a scalene triangle. So I'm going to write in scalene. And thank goodness for spell check, because I'm not very good at spelling. That's why I teach math. All right, here we go. Scalene triangle. So obtuse triangle, scalene triangle, those definitely are two that come to mind. But something else that I also could see on this one, if I really want to be accurate and give it all of its names, I could just call it a polygon. But if I wanted to be even more specific than that, I would call it an irregular polygon. Because if it's irregular, I'm going to move this down where you can see it better. If it's irregular, then your sides aren't the same, your angles aren't the same, and I definitely see that in this one. So I think that could be another name I could give it. and that's kind of one of those things where you have to kind of just stop and go, okay, hey, I've got to give it every name that it could be. And so it just takes that practice. You can't just say triangle now. That's not going to be good enough. You have to classify it with a little bit more detail. All right, so if I look at A again, I'm going to call it obtuse. I'm going to call it scalene. It's a polygon. It's an irregular polygon. Don't know that I would call it anything else. At this time, sometimes kids want to start making stuff up. No, I don't. I'm not want to make anything up here. I think we're good on our labels for A. Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm going to move over to C. I think C is a good one. It's kind of a popular one. Let's look at it first. And I didn't make up these shapes or this, what they were doing here on this page, but this is probably practicing measuring angles, which is going to come later in life. But still good for us to use. We could still use it to classify some of these triangles. All right, so I'm going to type out here to the side what all this one it could be, basically. Okay, so I definitely see all sides the same. So I'm going to start off with equilateral. Ooh. That was going to be scary without spell check. All right, equilateral, most definitely. I also see 60 degrees and then 60 degrees, and I'm pretty sure it's 60 degrees at the top. So 60 degrees, those are all less than 90. So I'm going to call this an acute triangle as well. All right. This one's interesting because even though it doesn't have it marked, I'm calling it equilateral. So since I'm calling it equilateral, then I know that this has to fall under that, okay, at least two sides are the same. And so if two sides are the same, at least two sides are the same, then I'm going to also have to call this isosceles. Ooh, there it is. Whew. Scared me for a second. Okay, so I've got equilateral triangle, equilateral triangle. I've got acute triangle. I've got isosceles triangle. I could call this a polygon. That's another name I could give it. But I could also call this one a regular polygon. And so basically, giving it all of its names here, I'd probably give it five names. It's equilateral, it's acute, it's an isosceles, because it at least has two. It's a polygon. It's also a regular polygon. Remember, regular polygons are the ones that have congruent sides and angles, so that falls under that category. And so I'm going to kind of back off here and go, okay, let's see. Do I have everything? I think it looks pretty good here. I'm not going to call it a quadrilateral. I'm not going to call it, I'm not going to call it obtuse. Definitely not an obtuse one. It's not scalene. Definitely has equal sides here that I could tell. They might mark it, again, just for practice. The marks would look kind of like this. Or they would say all the sides are 30 inches or something like that. So I think for the length of this video, without going overboard here, I think that's probably all I'm going to practice with you, but that's kind of the mindset that you need to have. You need to go back through, you need to make sure that you understand the six, what makes those triangles, what makes them unique. It's either classified by their sides or they're classified by their angles, and you just really have to learn them. And you really have to, again, maybe just in your everyday life, look out for them. That's what we do in my classroom. We try to find them and go, okay, well, hey, I've noticed, you've got a bunch of, scalene triangles, but I only see a couple isosceles or something like that. that could be happening. So that's just kind of the approach that you have to have with this. And again, we're not doing anything with operations. This is not adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. This is just kind of basic vocabulary. You've got to learn these shapes, and you got to learn what makes them what they are.